Welcome, travelers from across the digital highway. I'm Rich Mayo, this is Mach 1 Games, and we're talking about why you need to stop playing D&D right now. Well, not really. What we're going to talk about is why it is valuable to pause playing whatever system you've become accustomed to try out different systems from time to time, and why you need to shake yourself out of some of the patterns and conventions that you are used to. I'm not the fun police. I'm not here to simply criticize games that I have a lot of fun with and a lot of memories gathering with friends and just having hours of enjoyment in these different fantasy worlds and with different rule systems. However, I am an advocate that the rule system does define certain characteristics about your game. The rule systems, if you let them, can interfere with your game, and moreover, any rule system will alter your game. I know there's going to be people out there who have an initial objection to that premise because they suggest that a game master, dungeon master can overcome the deficiencies with a system with their own role-playing panache and their ability to manage the table and alter rules that don't suit, etc., etc. I find the argument disingenuous because it's just like arguing that cars don't matter, only drivers. Therefore, I'm taking my 65 Chevy out onto a Formula One track and surprised when the great driver doesn't have the experience that they want. Some of us, I would imagine all of us, some of the time, have had a session that's not been as fulfilling as it might be. And that's an obvious interaction, and sometimes it's the person, and sometimes it's the role-playing system. And I would imagine that more of us have thought after a session, why does it come back to certain well-hashed, well-worn tropes? I think you're going to find, if you truly examine it, the medium is the message. If you have certain role-playing systems that can only do one thing moderately well, that's all you do with the system, and then everything outside of that becomes the role-playing or the narrative, and you have this really stark contrast between the role-playing and the game. There's no lamination between the two, and I would put forward the thesis that a good role-playing game is able to move from role-playing to game, from game to role-playing seamlessly, that it encourages both at the same time, and not to be two disparate things. Matt Mercer is an excellent example of a storytelling style GM, but the lack of agency of the players at the table and the lack of the ability to interpret the results of the dice in any meaningful and cogent way is a direct result of the system that they're playing with. I'd love to see them play with a much better system because it would enhance rather than interfere with what's happening at the table. So now I'm going to start, rather than just hurling vague insults at some of the problems of role-playing games, I'm going to deal with both strengths and weaknesses as I talk, and I bounce back and forth between the two, and I hesitate to even say strengths and weaknesses. Let's just call them observation, because a strength is a weakness and a weakness is a strength, depending on what the outcome of it. Is the fact that Bilbo isn't particularly strong, is that a weakness of his character? No, right? So life's always a little bit more complicated. So the first thing is, Dungeons and Dragons has a huge player base. It has a huge base of people contributing source material to it. That is a reason to stick with it, because you're going to have a ready-made set of adventures and lots of ideas that are preformed into the packages that it creates. On the negative side, it's baked the setting right into the cake. It's very hard to change a setting. It's very hard to change the rules because the system is built in, and we have something like GURPS that's been around for a long time that really gave us something that you could do whatever you want with it, but players I think felt a little bit lost within the system, and it had some other deficiencies that unfortunately muddled the message, right? There's so many good things about GURPS, but there's so many bad things as well. So it couldn't quite reach over to that threshold into the promised land of people really seeing, hey, this gives us the power to tell a story, to be able to translate a concept into a world without the embedded setting interfering. I think that's a much better approach. I'm not espousing something new and novel. Just so for context and beyond the role-playing game, we have a very small introductory world. We have hints of a much larger world, but I feel that that's your story to tell. So we give you this core world, and then there's Venn circles that sort of overlap it. Here's this module with the elves. Here's another module. Elves and their misty kingdom and all the legends. You can play with it. You can play without it. It can just be source material and legends, or it can be real. And then it's slightly different geography, and it sits outside of a very vanilla setting. And by vanilla, again, it's not a pejorative term. It's something that is easily palatable for everyone, which then asks you, well, which elements of adventure are you putting into it to make it come alive? And so basically you have 4 overlapping rings to start from, and you can use one or none or all of those settings. So the GURPS approach I find excellent, but you need something to anchor it, and D&D, unfortunately, you cannot adjust the dials. You can't turn down magic in a D&D setting because all of the rules are bolt-ons, right? They exist as certain, and the exceptions, and they interact with each other in ridiculous, crazy ways, and that's in fact how you work towards optimization. Is you have this flawed set of rules, and you have the ways in which they can interact, and you build a character around it, and then you test that character at the table. And kind of wandered into a topic I didn't want to address, the shift between 2nd and 3rd edition, between a player-based game and a character-based game, and the implications of a character builder. There's a lot of stuff I want to talk about in future sessions. So my first critique or first observation was about the source material that's out there, the players that are out there. Now, having said that, that goes hand in hand with the conventions that are used at the table: armor class, hit points, turns, and rounds. And at some point, you see that these conventions actually separate the narrative and the mechanics of the system to a point you can drive a bus through them. And this is where the game starts to fall apart. It can't contain time very well. There's a number of serious flaws.